Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our participants to this webinar on Indigenous Peoples' rights in the context of business uh, and dealing with the experiences and the road ahead in relation to Indigenous Peoples' rights. As we all know, the theme of the Permanent Forum this year is Indigenous Peoples' Business, Autonomy, and Human Rights Principles of Due Diligence, including free, prior, and informed consent. This is the context of why we're having this webinar also as a side event, as the Permanent Forum session is starting today. So we all know that Indigenous peoples are seriously and adversely impacted by business operations, especially in relation to our rights to our lands, territories, and resources, our rights to self-determination, and our rights to cultural integrity. And this is happening in both in all over the world, including in developed and developing countries. So now and we certainly welcome that the Permanent Forum has explicitly put this as part of the theme of this session, because we cannot talk of human rights and development without also addressing the impacts of business operations to indigenous territories. So with this side event, we actually want to present the realities on the ground with particular cases of how business are impacting indigenous people's rights in 5 countries. These are in Mexico, Philippines, India, Russia, and Indonesia. So they will be presenting case studies for us to better understand how business at present, in spite of all the international laws or instruments in relation to indigenous people's rights, has been adopted by the UN. And the second one that we will look into is how to use the UN guiding principles on business and human rights to advance the rights of indigenous peoples, particularly in relation to the roadmap, including the roadmap of indigenous peoples. And with this, there will be presentation. And we are very privileged to have with us Anne Norgam to present, to give an opening remarks. I want to actually congratulate Anne Norgam for the successful case that they have filed in Finland. And I hope she will touch on that when she speaks. And we're very much privileged also to have with us 2 key UN staff and officials. We have Miss Fernanda Hopperhan. She's the vice chairperson of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and we also have Francisco Calichay, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Then we also have Casey Botts to give some concluding remarks. And I'm also happy to introduce to you the moderator of this event, Ms. Lola Alix Garcia of the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs. This event is co-organized by IPRI, the International Indigenous Peoples Rights International, by IFGIA, or the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs, and by TCF, the Christiansen Fund. So again, welcome to all of you, and we look forward to having an important and productive conversation, and we hope this will contribute to the discussions and of the theme of the Permanent Forum this year. So I would like now to pass on the moderation to Lola to introduce our opening remarks and take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. And I will try to moderate. I will start by saying that there is not much time. As Joanne said, we have 5 cases, the presentation of 5 cases. We have some reactions from UN officials. So the time given to the presenters are 5 minutes. And I would very, very much like to request you to be aware of the limited time that we have. I think it's better to keep your presentation as short as possible. And perhaps if we have some time at the end, perhaps we can add some kind, the presenters can add some more information. But be aware, it's very difficult as a moderator to cut people after the time has passed. So I will kindly request you to keep your time. But it's an honor and a pleasure for me also to introduce Anne Nogam. As I don't think Anne needs a lot of introduction, but Anne Nogam, of course, she's a member of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. She has been the chair of the Permanent Forum for 3 years. And Anne Nogam is a long-term Sami politician. She has been a member of the Sami Parliament of Finland since 2000. And perhaps a longer bio can be put in the chat in order for us not to use much time with that. But with those very short introduction, Anne, please, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Lola and Joanne, for those kind words. Dear Indigenous sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to be with you here on this side event, Indigenous Peoples' Rights in the Context of Business, and on behalf of the Permanent Forum. And it's also personally honor because this is my last side event as an chair of the Permanent Forum after 3 years. So I think it is fair and accurate to posit that corporations have played and are playing a significant role in undermining the rights of Indigenous peoples. I would even go so far as to say that certain businesses, which we will hear about today, are among the main drivers of human rights violations against Indigenous peoples. Logging, mining, the fossil fuel industry, industrial agriculture, the building of large energy generation projects like hydroelectric dams. Despite gains made by Indigenous peoples in recent decades, including recognition of our rights in laws and even in the constitutions of some countries, the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the establishment of the Permanent Forum, expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples, and a UN Special Rapporteur on rights of Indigenous peoples. When it comes to actual respect for Indigenous peoples' rights, in most cases, it is business as usual. On 16th of June 2011, the Human Rights Council unanimously adopted the UN Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. This report, which was led by the Special Representative of Secretary General, John Ruggie, was a significant achievement. The principles provide a global standard for preventing and addressing human rights abuses linked to business activities. The guiding principles are grounded in 3 main pillars: protect, respect, and remedy. 1. States have duty to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights and fundamental freedoms through regulation, policymaking, investigation, and enforcement. This pillar reaffirms states' existing obligations under international human rights law as put forward in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 2. Corporations, like states, have responsibility to uphold and protect human rights. The guiding principles encourage companies to carry out human rights impact assessments to assess the potential impacts of their operations. 3. Both states and corporations have responsibility to provide access to effective remedies when human rights are infringed upon. In the 11 years since the adoption of these principles, we have seen some progress. Many businesses have made commitments and even adopted policies aiming at ensuring protection and respect for human rights. Some of these commitments and policies even specifically address the rights of indigenous peoples. But a policy is only as good as its implementation. And when it comes to business, indigenous peoples continue to experience gross violations of our human rights. We continue to be forcibly evicted from our lands and territories. We continue to experience the usurpation of our national resources. And those of us who work to defend our rights in relation to harmful business activities continue to be criminalized, attacked, and even killed. There is a huge gap between what corporations are saying about indigenous people's rights and what is happening in our communities. There is so much work to do, and we know from experience that change always happens from bottom up. That if we are to protect our human rights, our right to self-determination, our collective rights to our lands, territories, resources, and knowledge, we must continue to be drivers of this change. And Joan asked me to mention a couple of words of our fishing right case. We have five of us in Finland deliberately fished illegally without permission. And we acknowledged that we did illegal fishing, but we stated that we didn't commit a crime, since our constitution protects our rights as Sami to live according to our culture. And so in the Supreme Court, we won the case, and the Supreme Court of Finland stated that our fishing wasn't excessive compared to our right to fish, so that we were freed of charges. And this was one of those strategic litigation cases which we're very happy to win. And now is the biggest challenge ahead of us, the implementation, and to follow the implementation in the legislation of Finland. So I look forward to hearing from today's speakers and to engaging all of you in finding ways to move forward in a positive way. Kiitos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much for introducing us to the UN Guiding Principles, and at the same time, of course, reminding us that even if there have been some developments, some positive developments, still the implementation gap is enormous, and indigenous people's rights in the context continue to be violated in the context of business operations. And thank you for sharing, and congratulations with the case, with the fishing rights of the Sami. And yeah, we will hear now 5 cases, as Joanne said. The first case is from the Philippines, and I'm very pleased to introduce Jili Carloson. She's an ISNAC indigenous young professional from the municipality of Cabugao in the province of Apayao, Cordillera region in the Philippines. And she's one of the conveners of Cabugao Youth and Indigenous Youth and Young Professionals organizations currently at the forefront of the struggle against the Genet Dams project. Jili, I know we have, as I said, very little time, but if you can give us a brief overview of the case, perhaps mention some of the key impacts of the business activities, and also if you can also share some information what kind of human rights abuses are being committed. Jili, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lila. I prepared your presentation, so I'm going to project it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carloson, a proud daughter of the Isnag Indigenous Peoples of Kabugao Apayao. On April 24, 1980, Maclean Dulag, a village tribal leader in our for his strong opposition to the proposed Chikwa River hydropower dam project. Yesterday, we commemorated his martyrdom and bravery as we continue to draw strength and inspiration from him in defending our ancestral lands. Today, I am speaking on behalf of my indigenous community, which faces the same struggle that Elder Dulag and his tribe fought 42 years ago. Our ancestral domain, Kabugao, is threatened to be inundated by 4 hydropower dam projects by Pan Pacific Renewable Power Philippines Corporation. Projected to generate 150 megawatts, Kenneth 1 Dam alone will affect 936 hectares of agricultural and residential lands, including our sacred grounds and public infrastructure. Meanwhile, Kenneth 2 is projected to generate 335 megawatts with a total project area of 1,976 hectares. Last year, Pan Pacific included 2 additional dams, namely Sikapu Dam with 40 megawatts and Maduan Dam with 55 megawatts capacity. Pan Pacific was required to undergo the free, prior, and informed consent process. But experiences of our people were the opposite of the guiding principle of the said process. The FPIC for Kenneth 1 and 2 dams were railroaded and maneuvered with the help of the same government agency mandated to implement the guidelines with due diligence. Despite strong opposition from the community, with 3 resolutions of non-consent for Kenneth 1 and 1 resolution of non-consent for Kenneth 2, applications for both projects were still forwarded to the Commission and Bank. Despite the lack of consent from the community, the certification precondition was still approved by the government office enacted to safeguard our rights as indigenous people. The guidelines were wittingly tweaked to favor the project proponent, severing the participation of the community through selection of handpicked and bribed so-called elders leaders. These are parts of the community resolutions that they tampered and forged to select handpicked and bribed elders. The set of elders negotiated the future of the Isnag Indigenous Peoples without community consultation and our consent. Free, prior, and informed consent. FPIC has become a commodity and a tool to exhaust the community to submission. We were not involved in most parts of the process, and our right to self-determination and cultural integrity were blatantly disrespected. The corporation's tactic to divide and conquer resulted in a tense and growing division between and among our people, which by far is the most significant impact of the proposed projects. We are being pitted against each other, and this glaring division between us presents a danger and has already affected the peace and tranquility of our town. We have recorded some physical and verbal altercations between neighbors, families, and friends due to the conduct of the FPIC process. The genuine voice and sentiments of the people are reduced to mere propaganda. Community members leading the fight and vocal in opposing the projects are being red tagged and called members of communist terrorist groups. The just struggle against the destruction of our ancestral lands, tagging and smear campaign attacks. As a result of the tedious and questionable FPIC process, we have little to be biased favorably in the side of IPs. If constructed, this large on the lives of 18,000 plus members of the indigenous community in Kabugao, as well as those in the neighboring provinces. For business communities, these projects mean profit. For the state, they are renewable energy source. But for us indigenous peoples, they mean destruction of our biodiversity, our rich culture and traditions, our sacred grounds, and our indigenous systems and practices. These projects will displace us and devastate our mighty Apaya River, which has been interwoven with our lives and identity since time immemorial. 42 years have passed since the assassination of Elder MacLean Dulag in Kalinga, and yet the state and the business sector haven't learned to respect and uphold our rights as indigenous peoples. Even with the passage of the Indigenous Peoples Rights Act, supposed to help or empower us, we are still being further marginalized with the relentless pillaging of our lands and resources, coupled with criminalization of defenders and numerous abuses of our rights. We are not against development, but if it is the development defined and captured by corporations for their profit making, then we will keep saying no. What we want is a just, inclusive, and equitable development with utmost respect to human rights and indigenous rights. We wish for stakeholders to help advance and promote IP rights, respect our self-determination and community resilience, and extract resources based on our needs and not for profit. With this, may we call on the state and the business communities to put people first and respect our inherent right as owners of ancestral lands, rivers, and resources. We reiterate that no consent, no entry. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Julie. And you touch upon, thank you very much for sharing the case in the Philippines, the hydroelectric dams. And you mentioned some very important issues, the issue of how to implement free, prior, and informed consent, the damage on the division in the communities. And of course, you end with the call to put peoples first. So thank you very much. And I hope we can have later on more time, perhaps in the questions and answers, to respond some of the question, to put some questions to you about the case. But now from the Philippines, I will go to Mexico, and we are honored to have with us Jose May Doroteo Jau Cook. He will present the impact of the mega pig farm on Maya people. And Jose is a member of the board of the Kanan Sonoot, which is a Mayan organization that defends the rights to self-determination and to water. It was formed in 2017 to summon, organize, and defend the decision of the Homun Maya to say no to the mega pig farm that was planned to be built in their territory. So, Jose, the floor is yours. Por favor, José, tienes la palabra.
Malokin, in Cabatene, Doroteo Jau, Lady Directivo en Shanti Cananzonote, y Tonsane, pues, tan resistencia, 6 años tan, pues, que lucha, pues, de la, pues, tan que, pues, letim, ton se ocupa el gobierno, y verá, y este el gobierno tan bateo. Yo le lo, Malokin, verá. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Greetings from Jumo Yucatan. We are from the Maya people. We are fighting against a mega pig farm here in Comun. And Mr. Doro was saying that we have been fighting for 6 years. We got organized, and the state gave permission to this company to build the mega pig farm. So we have been in this struggle for 6 years now, and we have been greatly impacted by this. We live in a reserve where we have a lot of, most of Yucatan's sweet water. Most of us have lived here in this municipality, and many companies think that they will bring development to our community, but our community already had a sort of development, or rather its own development. So we got together to organize, and we started this movement called Hawan Konot, which is Guardians of the Water Basins. So here a lot of people speak Maya and they defend their land, but what bothers us is that they want to impose a lifestyle that we do not want. They want to do whatever they want with our people. We actually carried out a consultation to ask the community if they wanted the mega pig farm, and at the end, everyone said no. So we have been involved in many situations, such as issues with the government, with the business people. We also had issues with the community at first because of the information that the business people shared. So what we ask is to have our right respected and have the community decide. If we do not want the mega pig farm, let's respect that right. However, unfortunately, we see that municipal authorities, state authorities, federal authorities are colluded with business. We have seen the closings of our activities here, and we are very angry about it because the government's institutions are not doing the work they are supposed to. So we need to defend what is ours. It's also important to make the government understand that we do not want this company and we want them to respect the community's decision. This is not an easy task because the system is quite complicated, but we're still struggling, we're still fighting, and we won't stop defending ourselves. Fortunately, the mega pig farm is closed, it's not operating, but there are still many open farms that are running in Yucatan and that are impacting our lands. So we see that it's an impact not only in our community, but in the whole state of Yucatan. So we will keep fighting for our land. Also, what bothers us the most is that they haven't respected this consultation. The government hasn't respected it, nor the company. Thank you.
Contra el gobierno ya te le balo con la que yo voy ton fumna le tic propio gobierno legalmente ma tu ben dic atmonto más grande de tie fuerza ya te empresarios pero tone ma ya te caja no yes what gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias, José y Doroteo. Yeah, the need to respect the decisions from indigenous peoples. I think it's important. It's crucial, and of course you also mentioned the imposition on the part of the state on a certain kind of development and a way of life that is not the way of life, and it's not the wish and the interests of the community. And of course, you make a call to the authorities for respecting indigenous people's decisions. And I'm happy to hear that the farm is not operating, and we can just hope that it will never operate. And also that many other communities are also raising their voices against this kind of business operations. Thank you very much, Jose and Doroteo, for sharing it with us. And from Mexico, we go to Indonesia. And It is a pleasure for us to have Norman Juan here today with us. And he will talk about the ancestral domain dispossession in Ceballos Hamlet. He's from the Dayak Kerambai Indigenous Peoples tribe of West Kalimantan, Borneo Island, and he lives in Pontianak City, West Kalimantan, Borneo Island. He's the co-author of many national and international publications, and Norman is indeed a resource person in the field of indigenous and universal human rights, social and ecological justice in regional and international seminars, conference, workshops, symposiums all over the world. So Norman, it's a great pleasure to hand it over to you to make your presentation.
Thank you very much. I hope my slides are seen, and I can start and quickly introduce the cases, and I follow I hope my voice is clear.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That is a good confirmation. I follow the outline that prepared based on the concept notes by the UNPFII, and I would like to just go on with my slide. And when we talk about indigenous peoples in West Kalimantan, it is part of native of Borneo people who lives in Borneo since time of immemorial. The Dayak Bekati Riuk from Ceballos actually live in that area. Went back to maybe before 300 years ago, or before Indonesia even a country. It's part of the Bidayu people. They live in these indigenous territories, and they have been struggling, fighting against oil palm plantations expansion in their indigenous territories. Not only oil palm, but also other plantations like onion, logging, as well as pulp and paper or tree plantation. They managed to against this type of impositions, expansion in their indigenous territories, but without notification and consultation with their leader, indigenous leader. Oil palm plantation companies managed to exploit other communities, those who agree with oil palm plantations, to surrender about 117 hectares in Dayak Bekati Riuk indigenous territories to be converted for oil palm plantations. These are the maps that I'm talking about. 117 hectares. We are talking about the indigenous communities who are against oil palm plantations. These are the land grabbing from our point of view by the company directly. And when we talk about how states are taking part in the human rights violations of these indigenous rights of the Dayak Bekati Riuk, these are the concessions from the 117 hectares being grabbed and opened and planted by oil palm plantations. These are the areas that in yellow is the concessions issued by the government. So we are talking about the government is also part of the parties who are abusing or violating indigenous people's rights in these cases. So what is the companies? The companies is part of one of the largest biodiesel producers in Indonesia. The group, the company subsidiaries name operating in Dayak Bekati Riuk communities name is PT Ceria Prima. It's a subsidiary of Darmek Agro. Darmek Agro or Duta Palma Group is one of the biodiesel producers whose last year received 9 trillion rupiah subsidized by the government of Indonesia to buy 2.49 million kiloliters of biodiesel from palm oil. This group supplies also palm oil to Arhus, Kalsam, ADM, Evan, Kesson, Fuji, General Mills, L'Oreal, Mondelez, Nestle, and PepsiCo. This means the importing countries taking part in the human rights abuses or human rights violations coming from OECD countries like France, Japan, Sweden, and US. They are also prominent members of Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil and Palm Oil Innovation Groups members. They are standard-setting organizations that are adopting or adopt the UN guiding principle on business and human rights. So what are the impacts of this business? We listed that at least loss of land up to horizontal conflicts, 18 types of impacts that burn by these Dayak Bekati Riuk communities. I don't want to repeat, read them all because I don't think my time is permit me to. And criminalizations also taking place and happening. Extinctions of rare, threatened, and endangered fauna and flora, habitat loss, like orangutan. These areas used to be orangutan habitats, part of the 117 hectares that is actually a customary forest that protected by Dayak Bekati Riuk since time of immemorial. But then by the palm oil company, they just bulldozed that and converted that to oil palm plantations. And then what are human rights abuses by the corporations? From non-discriminations and equality, abusing of rule of law, right to food, right to housing, right to effective remedies, right to freedoms of movement, right to freedom of opinions and expression, assembly, right to informations, and undermining right to life. Nobody's killed, but what's happening when criminalizations happened in 2021. Right to life is really getting threatened by what's happening by the criminalizations against not only to those who are being criminalized, but their community members. They cannot live in peaceful conditions. They were fear of being threatened to be arrested or to be accused or to be persecuted as criminals. And right to participations in the development, right to traditional resources, right to own properties, right to self-determination, right to take part in cultural life, right to clean water and sanitation, right of indigenous people to their traditional land, territories, including water. Bearing in mind that this district, Bangkayang district, already adopted a local law on the protection and recognition of indigenous people's rights. So there are so many elements of the indigenous rights that being abuses and by the operations of the company. Rights of human rights and environmental defenders, those who are protecting and defending their indigenous rights are human rights defenders from my point of view. And failures of the governments and companies to respect, protect, and remedy human rights impacts of this palm oil business. And Indonesia already adopted, if we are talking about human rights violation by the state, Indonesia already adopted civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, eliminations of discriminations of racial discriminations, eliminations of discrimination against women, right of the child, convention against torture and other cruel and degrading treatments, convention on rights of persons with disabilities, and These are type of from my point of view, from our point of view, from the case study that we did with Dayak Bekati Riuk in Sebalos. This is also according to constitutional rights under Indonesian 1945 constitutions, right to life, to defend their life and existence, and etc. At least 15 types of rights that from our point, from this case study, identified being undermined or abused by the states. So these are the victims of the criminalizations, community members that arrested. The way police officer arrest him as if he's a criminal. He defended their indigenous territories, customary right, customary forests, from being taken and grabbed by the company. But he was taken without legal and proper procedure or due procedure, legal procedure. He was kidnapped from the market at night. So we, our indigenous fellow in Sebalos called this as a kidnapping process, not proper detention or arrest process without letter of notification to the community, to the family members. So what are our calls from these cases? We have several calls. The first call is to the states. The states should issue affirmative policy to solve agrarian conflicts caused by this company, and adopt affirmative policy on the recognition and protection for Dayak Bekati Riuk pursuant to Bengkayang Regulations number 4, 2019 on the protection and recognition of Indigenous Peoples' Rights in Bengkayang. Stop legal processes and criminalization measures towards Sebalos people who are defending their human rights and indigenous rights recognized under Indonesian human rights laws and ratified international human rights laws. And sanction PT Ceria Prima over legal breaches and taking over of Sebalos indigenous territories. Second call to the company. Complies with business responsibilities on human rights in its operation and business relations. Respect human rights of indigenous peoples wherever Ceria Prima is operating. Solve agrarian conflicts with Dayak Bekati Riuk and Sebalos in good faith and in responsible manners. The current way of dealing with these cases is really criminalizing indigenous people, not in a good faith and not in a responsible manner. Undertake measurable action to remedy severe or adverse human rights impact experienced by Dayak Bekati Riuk and Sebalos, Dayak Bekati Riuk Sebalos indigenous people. So to the UN, the next call, UN Human Rights Working Group on Business and Human Rights, immediately adopt legally binding instruments to regulate in international human rights laws the activities of transnational corporations and other business enterprises. To make it not just a voluntary, this must be a legally binding instrument. So, to the international buyers and importing countries that I mentioned in my previous slides, preventing growing worse situations of human rights violations, business partners stop buying palm oil from Darmek Agro Group, Duta Palma Group, until PT Ceria Prima resolve agrarian conflicts and remedying severe human rights impacts experienced by Dayak Bekati Riuk, Sebalos indigenous people. I think that's all my sharing, my presentation. Thank you very much. to my fellow indigenous peoples, Dayak Bekati Ryuk in Sebalos. And thank you very much as my sister, brothers from all over the world. Thank you very much, organizer. Bye.
Thank you very much, Norman, for a very substantive presentation where you have from listed the impacts. As far as I have noted, you gave 18 key impacts of the business enterprises. You have also listed the human rights abuses by the company, and of course, ending with very, very clear recommendations or demands, more than recommendations, demands to the government, to the companies, and some recommendations to the UN with regard to the need for a legally binding instrument that is not only a voluntary as the UN guiding principles, but somehow it can regulate and keep states and companies accountable to the human rights violations. Thank you very much, Norman. And from Indonesia, I will go to Russia. And it's an enormous pleasure for me to have with us Pavel Suliansiga, who will present the case of the Nornickel and indigenous Thai mare Tolgan Nenets in Siberia. And Pavel is the founder and president of Batani Foundation. He's a former member and chair of the United Nations Working Group on Business and Human Rights. And Pavel was the one to present a report to the UN General Assembly in his position as the chair of the working group of a report on indigenous peoples and business and human rights. He is also a former member of the Public Chamber of Russia until 2000, and until 2010, he was the first vice president of the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, RIPON. And Pavel also has been a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues from 2005 to 2011. Pavel has a huge CV in that context as an activist, as a leader of indigenous peoples in Russia, but also of indigenous peoples at the international level. So Pavel, it's an honor for us to have you here, and I hand it over to you.
Спасибо большое, Lola.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lola, for your warm welcome. I would also like to share my recognition to UNPFII for organizing such an important side event. I would like to tell you a couple of latest cases, the cases of Nornickel that has been happening since 2020. In May 2020, in Norilsk, Nornickel, one of the biggest Russian and even international companies, who is a big seller of different metals and also one of the biggest polluters in the world. In May 2020, Nornickel has caused another ecological disaster. One of the reservoirs that Nornickel has had a spill, an oil spill, in the river basin where indigenous peoples traditionally live. You need to understand that Nornickel on the Taimyr Peninsula controls almost everything. And when this disaster has happened, attempting to find our voice and to say that this disaster has happened, all those attempts were blocked by Nornickel. And only a few days later, this disaster has been reported. This information has come from the indigenous peoples representatives who were one of the first to feel the impact of this disaster, of this spill. Their attempts to turn to non-nickel, to turn to the government, were in vain. Only when this disaster was reported several days later, then non-nickel started to cleaning up its own mess. The impact of this disaster is enormous. Indigenous peoples representatives addresses in different places did not have any effect. I mean, the indigenous peoples organizations who are working on protecting our rights have started thinking how to protect our people from this disaster. They started writing addresses, they started organizing consultations. And one of the things that helped was a direct address to Elon Musk on one of his social media pages. And then Elon Musk has turned to other metal producers that he is ready to make big contracts with different metal providers for 50 years. And this is when we decided to write a big open letter to Elon Musk asking Tesla not to buy metal, not to buy nickel from non-nickel. And I want to say that with the support from our different partners, we managed to reach Tesla. We started negotiating with this company, and we created an international coalition in the support of indigenous people's rights. We have also organized negotiations with non-nickel partners, including Swiss banks and a German company, Hesse. I want to say that the negotiations were quite a success. We have found some understanding between ourselves, especially with the non-nickel partners. And after those consultations, the partners started their own negotiations with non-nickel, as did we. Those negotiations were complicated, but we are thankful that they took place. And I want to give them what is owed, that they agreed to talk to us. But I can't say they were very productive. We couldn't agree even on the most basic terms of the international standards, for instance. They are interpreting those terms as they want and not as they should be interpreted. And unfortunately, our negotiations with non-nickel were at an impasse. And non-nickel, I can say, sees those negotiations more as a PR stunt rather than an actual negotiation. We did not see any action taken after them. Non-nickel was doing their PR, and of course I want to give them credit, at least some of it. They did something, they did start paying compensations, they did start paying reparations, but in general, non-nickel policy did not change. They still pressured indigenous people's representatives, they still blackmailed us. And non-nickel in the latest days started to claim that they were one of the first in the Russian Federation or even in the world to launch a big project on FPIC. But in our opinion, this is also a PR stunt rather than a real initiative. Of course, it could bring some good action, but it is a project that doesn't relate in itself to FPIC principle, because the people that were offered relocation according to this, in the course of this project, they had initially this right to be relocated based on the Russian law. So they were offering to do something which has already existed. And of course, the situation has drastically changed. I mean, our negotiations have drastically changed when the war has started. The war, the Russian invasion in Ukraine. The situation in Russia drastically changed. And if you are brave enough to stand up for your own rights, the government is launching repressions against activists and against indigenous peoples' leaders. And of course, we see that independent communities are pressured when they're trying to stand up to non-equal in their fight for their own rights. And I think and I project that non-equal leaders will use this situation to pressure us even more, as will the government. The repressions will increase and our voices will be silent. We are already seeing that special police forces are entering our villages, our homes, without any due process, without any orders. They're doing this at night, and they're harassing people who are not content with non-equal policy. I would also like to say that non-equal has often claimed and offered as its own advantage that they have an Indigenous Peoples Council in their own board. And a lot of Indigenous peoples' representatives did not want to make part of this council. They were pressured and they were harassed to do this. But one of the conditions to join this Indigenous Peoples Council at non-equal was to take part in PR stunts that the company was launching. And the only condition to join this council was to not say that there is an impact, there is damage from this ecological disaster. And we can see that now the pressure on those communities has increased even more. And I'm not sure how the situation will unfold. I would also like to say that non-equal started inviting international experts to their PR stunts. They are offering them titles and positions, and some of these experts don't know what non-equal is and are ready to underestimate it. So non-equal is trying to do both things. So at the same time, they are pressuring us and are not respecting our rights. And at the same time, they're trying to say that everything is good. I think you all know Johannes Aurora. who's one of our biggest friends, who was denied the entry to Russian Federation for 50 years. It happened after he gave a speech at the Business and Human Rights Forum in Geneva, after he criticized business and indigenous people's rights violations. Right after this speech, Johannes was denied entry to Russian Federation. Why am I giving you this example? Because I can say that Russian companies, and especially Nornickel, are launching very aggressive international politics in terms of PR about indigenous peoples. And Nornickel continues to lie how indigenous peoples are well and live well in Russian Federation. For instance, Mrs. Gorbunova, who was appointed to one of the UN bodies, works at one of the indigenous peoples organizations who is 100% financed by Nornickel, and thus cannot have an independent voice. And unfortunately, the Nornickel case and this whole situation that happened at Taimyr Peninsula shows that Nornickel not only tries to bash us with propaganda and lies at the territory of the Russian Federation, but also does this at the international levels. And I think that the international movement of indigenous peoples will have to face this many times. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pavel, and thank you for sharing the experience with Nornickel, the ecological damage that they made, also their strategies. I think the whole issue of the misuse, I would call the free, prior, informed consent, promoting themselves, that they are the first company in Russia and even in the world, and how this free, prior, informed consent can be misused by companies, also using indigenous peoples as a PR stunt, and with this Indigenous Council. The thing that I think is very interesting, Pavel, that you share, it was somehow your strategy and your negotiations with Nornickel partners, and which you assess as has some positive impact, limited, but at least I think many indigenous peoples also over the world can learn something about how to use these partners of these kind of companies to put pressure on the company. But and I'm very, very sorry to hear and your assessment that the war now between Russia and Ukraine, so it will have even a disastrous impact on the communities affected by Nornickel. But thank you very much, Pavel. And from Russia to the last case that we will present before we get some reactions from UN officials, I will give the floor to Dines Murmu, who will talk about the coal mining and indigenous peoples in Jharkhand. And Dines is a member of the Santal tribal community from the eastern India state Jharkhand. And he's currently president of the Adivasi Mulvasi Adhikar Manch, Bokaro district state of Jharkhand. So please, Dines, the floor is yours.
सभी को जोहार। मेरी आवाज आ रही है? आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
Am I audible to all of you? Am I audible to all of you? Please confirm that I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, you are.
Johar to everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. Johar and Zindabad. Actually, we are struggling a lot. We are based in Jharkhand, a state in India, and this is a story of our struggle that about giving us. Big companies are saying about giving us employment, and also they tried to convince us with the concept of with the concept of the development which those buddy companies are looking at it with their definition. But we are saying that just to providing just to you are just false promising about the giving us employment for the 3,000 people, but the kind of damages those companies are doing to the environment, to the indigenous people staying there is that is the concern. And we are being indigenous people, we are very committed to our geographical areas, our culture, and our residence place and our environment. Big companies are coming into our spaces, geographical spaces, and land. They are acquiring natural resources like land, jungle, land, forest, and water. They are using it, and they are actually contaminating those natural resources. We are facing so many problems related to our health, and Modi government is also not looking at it very carefully and in a concerned way. We have also tried to reach to our home minister, and he is also not actually listening to our concerns. And we are also approaching state government for the not giving permission to such companies to enter in our geographical spaces, in our environmental area. And the government always say that we are a government of the people. Then they should actually understand the concerns what indigenous people are going through, and what they are facing. uh, these natural resources are very important for us being indigenous people, and we are concerned about the land, water, and forest, and our right on those natural resources. We are actually distributed and segregated in so many identities like Dalit, tribal, indigenous people, and those and there are so many other communities who are marginalized and are struggling with taking stand against these big companies and struggling to raise their voices and to convince government and those big companies about the damages they are doing to us, our geographical and environment. That is how we are actually approaching governments, and also trying to explaining them to the different laws. We are taking also help of Gram Sabhas, which is a local village body, local village administrative body, and uh, government is also say government has already said that Gram Sabha is a local bodies have the right, have so many rights to decide about their own land, own geographical area. They can take this decision and convey this to government, and convey this to upper administrative entities. and we are actually against the coal mining, and still we have so many good laws, such as taking decision in these local bodies, but it is not getting implemented very effectively, and that and those attempts we are trying, still the government is not listening to us, and so many indigenous people are standing against their ill implementation of such good laws. They are raising their We are raising our voices and telling them, telling government that they should actually stop giving permissions to such companies to enter in our geographical and environmental area, because only one plant damages so much of land resources, also the biodiversity around the area. They are actually spoiling and contaminating resources like water. They are actually exploiting, snatching these natural resources from us. Tribal people, indigenous people, we I always believe in coexisting with nature, and we pray for actually the betterment of the whole world. As a globe, we want to protect our Mother Earth, and we are actually protesting to take a stand against those kind of decisions by government, and we are also approaching other local administrative bodies to submit our submissions regarding our stand, and we do not agree that government should enter in our area or big companies enter in our areas. We are committed to our land resources. We are not giving this permission to spoil our land, to dig into it, just to take out the enriching resource like coal, taking actually benefit to, and companies are taking these all these benefits and profits, but what we are getting is important. We are not getting employment, we are not getting a good compensation. They are not actually concerned about the environment. We all have There are so many people from our indigenous communities who have actually migrated to different areas. They are actually damaging our people in the name of development. And we have they have already spoiled our culture. We have already struggling to keep it safe, safety security of our people, who all are actually taking stand and standing against it. They are just giving name of business or development, but they are actually exploiting and exploiting our resources and spoiling it, and they are I just wanted to say this, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share our struggling experiences here on this big platform and forum. Thank you so much to the organizers. If anyone have any questions or concerns or your comments, please feel free to share in the chat box or on the mic, via mic, through the organizers. Thank you so much.
Lola, you're muted. Lola, you're muted. Lola, you're muted.
I know.
You're muted. Lola, just press the unmute. Okay. Just unmute.
Yeah, I know. And
There, we can hear you now.
can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, it's because my computer has gone black. So now I don't know. I cannot push any button. But okay, without my notes, I will now. We will start the third part of the side event, which is we will have some reactions, as Joanne said in the beginning, from some UN officials. And the next one, and we are very honored and pleased to have Fernanda Hoppenheim with us. She is the vice chairperson of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. And Fernanda, I don't have my notes about your CV, your bio. I hope the organizers can put it in the chat. But you have a long experience, and you have been working for almost 20 years on the issue of business and justice. And so we are very pleased with regard to your position, or how do you assess also what are the opportunities for indigenous peoples of using the working group on business and human rights. And also, I don't know if you have any specific comment on the cases that have been presented. Please, Fernanda, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I hope you can hear me okay. I thank this invitation, and I'm going to switch to Spanish now. I'm going to be speaking in Spanish. Buenos días a todos y todas. Buenas tardes.
Good morning, everyone, once again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much to the organizations for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor to react briefly with some comments. I would also like to thank all of the colleagues that shared the different cases, and we actually see some patterns that we have been identifying for some years and that keep happening, such as the lack of respect of the free, prior, and informed consent, or the right to self-determination of indigenous peoples, as well as pollution and degradation of the environment and natural resources. And of course, all of the impacts to human rights defenders that come from an indigenous community, such as criminalization, persecution, and these are facts that we have been identifying as working group for many years. Lola and Pavel, as part of this working group in 2013, to the General Assembly of the UN, and field visits to different countries, as well as communications and urgent calls that we have shared from the working group to different states and companies over the last years. I would like to start by saying that this is a priority theme for the working group. We are still very committed to the work we do and accompanying indigenous peoples that have been affected or impacted by these projects. So in the next decades, thanks to the guiding principles, we have been able to set several objectives, and it's important to keep deepening our work with IPRI in order to improve our work in protecting indigenous people's rights in the context of business. As we have mentioned, the guiding principles set a framework, a common language, and a global standard of protecting indigenous people's rights in the context of business. These guiding principles are quite general, so they include all states, all rights, all businesses. And we have the responsibility to respect the rights from the companies, and the states also should be aware of that, so it applies to everyone. The guiding principles also mention specifically vulnerable communities, indigenous communities, and as we have said, we have seen a lot of progress over the last 10 years, but there's still a lot to do, especially when it comes to implementation, political coherence, as well as having enough tools so that these double standards that companies and even some states implement will stop. We also have the global trend towards the implementation of mandatory measures, which is one of the calls that one of our colleagues presented. And it's very clear for us in the international trends. We're going towards mandatory measures for companies and states. However, here I must say that the guiding principles on business and human rights are not presenting new obligations or new rights, but guaranteeing the rights that already exist and establishing clear expectations regarding human rights and businesses and operations. So our goal is to make states comply with their obligations and companies to assume their commitments with human rights, and also to have access to remediation and justice measures so that this will be a reality and not only superficial changes and speeches or policies or political public commitments that are never implemented and that just keep violating human rights and impacting people around the world. And of course, in this case, it's important to respect indigenous people's rights across the board. This is very important for us, and the working group has different possibilities to keep pushing to the compliance of these obligations from the businesses and the states. So first of all, we have the thematic reports where the working group has established the analysis and issues recommendations and specific measures regarding the topics that we're working on. So, for example, right now I'm working on a report that I will submit to the UN General Assembly regarding political interference from businesses in a wrong way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity of collaboration in public policies interference, as well as the justice system, the laws, and the constitutional reforms. This is where we're going to submit recommendations to make sure we have a good definition of political incidents from businesses and a unlawful interference. So this is a way in which the working group can work on specific populations and specific requirements. We also have specific recommendations to states and businesses on specific cases. You can send us your claims, we can study them, and then issue recommendations so that we can try to intervene in those cases through the communication systems. We can also write amicus in the case of cases that go to court, which I believe is a tool that is very interesting, that can be very helpful, but is not often used. And it can be used at international courts. We also have country visits, and we will keep issuing recommendations regarding the different cases and communities that have been affected. It's also important to to focus on the mandatory measures as well that I mentioned. So that will be all for my reaction. Thank you so much to the organizers, to the colleagues, and you can count on me at the working group to continue with this dialogue. Thank you so much, Fernanda.
Thank you very much for sharing your analysis, but also sharing the importance of the work and the mandate of the working group and what you can do, the issue of the communication, the amicus, I think it's very important. Indigenous peoples have been, since the establishment of the working group, has been actively engaging every year during the sessions of the Forum on Business and Human Rights, bringing their issues there. So thank you very much. And I know in the assessment report prepared by the working group on the 10 years of implementation of the UN Guiding Principles, also you make a specific reference to Indigenous peoples' rights and the situation of Indigenous peoples in the context of business enterprises, human rights and business enterprises. So thank you very much, Fernanda, for joining us today. And now we will have a video from the UN, from Francisco Calizay, which is the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I don't think Francisco needs a lot of introduction. He has been a leader and an activist for the recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights since the 80s. And he has been participating in the negotiations of the UN Declaration and many other. So not only with regard to the promotion, of course, and the respect of the rights of Indigenous peoples in Guatemala, but also at the global level. So I will ask the organizers to put the video.
It is a great honor and privilege to join you today, even by video. I want to thank Indigenous Peoples Rights International Working Group on Indigenous Affairs, and the Christensen Fund for organizing this event to speak about Indigenous peoples' rights in the context of business experiences and the road ahead. The issue of violation of the rights of Indigenous peoples as a result of the development of non-consulted economic projects in their ancestral land is a central theme of the great concern of this mandate. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the impact of this economic project on the right of Indigenous peoples at the global level from January 2021 to the present, the majority of the communication that I have sent to the state have to do with violation of collective rights, in particular the right to land, territory and resources, and the right to free prior and informed consent due to projects developed on their ancestral land without their consent. In addition, more than a half of the communication that I have sent since the beginning of my mandate concern the violence against Indigenous human rights defenders that occur during the action to protect Indigenous land from development projects approved without the consent of Indigenous peoples. The topic of businesses and Indigenous peoples' rights was also a central theme of my two thematic reports. In my report to the Human Rights Council in September 2021 on the impact of the state COVID-19 recovery measures on Indigenous peoples, I expressed my concern that in many cases, recovery laws have been primarily geared toward managing the economic crisis and prioritized and supported the expansion of business operation at the expenses of Indigenous peoples, their land, and the environment. During the pandemic, there has been a sharp rise in illegal deforestation, land incursion, and violence with little government aid or oversight. The enforcement of COVID-19 measures has been used to strengthening authoritarian, militarized responses criminalizing Indigenous human rights defenders. Peaceful protests are being restricted while the expansion, construction, and operation of commercial and extractive industries continue to promote economic recovery. My annual thematic report to the General Assembly in October 2021 on indigenous people living in urban areas showed that the extractive activities and development projects are leading push factors driving indigenous peoples to urbanization as their land rights are being undermined by intensified pressure from the state policies that favor the escalation of large-scale projects for extractive industries. Indigenous people who voluntarily relocate or are forcibly relocated to urban areas encounter barriers to access to adequate health care, safe drinking water and sanitation, culturally appropriate education, employment opportunities, and adequate housing. This is just to give you a general idea of the impact of the topic. I also want to emphasize that this issue has to do with the right to self-determination of indigenous people in conjunction with their right to development. Whenever an economic project does not conform to the indigenous idea of development, it is imposed on them. It violates the right of indigenous peoples to self-determination in the sense of freely deciding their economic priorities following their worldview, as established in Article 3, 20, and 23 of the UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for exercising their right to development under their cosmovision. For this reason, it is necessary that following Article 19 of the UN Declaration, indigenous people are consulted in definition of national economic policies and they can decide the economic development plans in their territories. Concerning possible collaboration and action, I can take the follow-up on this issue according to my mandate. I can carry on several activities. For instance, I can send a communication to states concerning ongoing human rights violations. From this point of view, a special procedures mechanism can intervene directly, not only with governments, but with other actors, including multilateral banks or corporations, regarding allegations of human rights abuses. To do so, we can send communication to the actors involved that identify the facts of the complaint, the applicable international human rights norms and standards, the concern and questions of the mandate holders, and seek follow-up actions. In 2021, along with my mandate sent 14 communications to private entities, along with other special procedures in these communications. I am not only referring to indigenous human rights standards, but also the UN guiding principle on business and human rights. Among the communication I sent, I can mention the one addressed to electicide the France regarding wheat farms in Oaxaca, Mexico, Ken Don Ranch Limited on the criminalization of indigenous Maasai human rights defenders in Kenya, and Greenland Mineral Limited for possible human rights violation and harmful environmental consequences of the uranium mining project. I invite all my brothers and sisters to send me information on the struggle you are facing, and I will evaluate the opportunity for sending communication to a state and corporation. I also can support the development of human rights standards by submitting expert testimonies and amicus curiae in leading judicial cases concerning indigenous human rights and businesses. There are only some of the ways I can intervene, so I invite all of you to check my webpage and communicate with me if you have any question. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much to Francisco. And I just want to note the last, what he said in his speech, that encouraging all of you to submit communications so he can use and he can take action as special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples, but also, as Fernanda said, also they're working on business and human rights, also submit communication to states and companies. So just encouraging all of you to send your cases, to use those mechanisms for the protection of your rights. But with the words of the special rapporteur, I will give the floor to Joan Carney, but she did not introduce so much herself, is the executive director
of Indigenous Peoples Rights International, IPRI, and also she has been a member of the UN Permanent Forum, and Joanne has a long history of Indigenous rights activist, both at the national level, at the international level. So please, Joanne, the floor is yours. I hope you can share with us some ideas about the Indigenous Peoples Roadmap for the second decade of implementation of the UN Guiding Principles. IPRI and IFGIA, with the support of the Christensen Fund, developed a report in 2021 and about the assessment on how the UN Guiding Principles have been implemented in the context of Indigenous Peoples' rights. And as mentioned here, I think by Anne Nogam in the beginning, there has been some positive developments at the policy level, but I would say not that positive developments. On the contrary, and on the ground level, the situation is deteriorating. Criminalization continue and even increasing. So I think this gap between the good intentions of policies and the realities of Indigenous peoples on the ground. But Joanne, I think if you can share some ideas about the roadmap, what can be done by Indigenous peoples to ensure the UN Guiding Principles are implemented in their benefit or in the benefit of their rights.
Okay, thanks for that, Lola. Before I present the roadmap or the gist of it, let me first state that IPRI has developed a briefing paper on Indigenous peoples' human rights and business activities, the UN Guiding Principles and the protection of the rights of Indigenous peoples in the context of business operations. The link will be provided by my colleague, which this briefing paper also contains what has been achieved by the working group or implemented by the working group in relation to the UNGP or the UN Guiding Principles. And as you've mentioned, the huge gaps on how this can be addressed. So just to again state that since criminalization of Indigenous peoples is very much dominant in relation to business operations, especially in the context of the lack of legal recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. And this is a key driver of criminalization by business to Indigenous people. So that is the reason why IPRI has taken on this issue as one of its thematic focus. So with this, you've mentioned that we've together with you the assessment of the first decade, right, has been done, and as a follow through with that, IPRI has done capacity building activities through webinars in the three regions, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and also a discussion on what can be the roadmap of Indigenous peoples for the second decade. So it's like how are we as Indigenous peoples work together so that we address this common issue in relation to the violations of our rights by business operations, and ensure that our rights are protected, but also our contributions to development is also protected and acknowledged. So with this, the roadmap that has emerged, this draft that I'm presenting, is based on the inputs provided by Indigenous leaders and representatives from the three regions, and the three areas covered by this draft roadmap is first on the issue of capacity building. Indigenous peoples underline the need to build capacity in understanding human rights instruments, including the protection of the rights of Indigenous peoples on the context of business operations. And one of these is awareness in terms of the UN Guiding Principles and its and how it can uphold Indigenous peoples' rights. So I just want to take this opportunity that IPRI has produced a video on an overview on the UNGP and indigenous people. So this is an important awareness raising material. But part of the capacity building is also interlearning exchanges. For example, in the issue of FPIC implementation, and also sharing of good practices, as well as seminars and workshops on indigenous people's rights and the UNGP, and also in developing adequate toolkits and guides that will ensure indigenous peoples are able to meaningfully engage with all relevant actors, especially business actors and also state actors, in promoting or in defending the rights of indigenous peoples. So this is part of the capacity building needs that has been expressed by those who participated in the consultations. The second area is in relation to defense and advocacy. So this refers to developing strategies and instruments on how we can respond to ongoing violations. So this will include advocacy, also in relation to accountability and justice, having justice in relation to violations, as well as mechanisms to ensure compliance with the human rights obligations of states and companies, because also states has a critical role, because states has to regulate companies. So the advocacy is targeting both business and states, because they have to be held accountable and ensure that business operations respect and protect indigenous people's rights. So with this second area on defense and advocacy, it will include the continuing advocacy and engagement of indigenous peoples in relation to the mandatory human rights due diligence law of EU, in terms of the EU corporations in the supply chains, and also in the treaty, the binding treaty on transnational corporations to respect human rights. So this engagement and advocacy at the global level will be pursued. And third is strengthening solidarity, collaboration, and building alliances, because it's important for us amongst ourselves to also develop our own systems and assert our own systems of protection. It is also within our solidarity, collaboration, and building alliances that we can prevent further attacks to indigenous peoples, human rights, and environment defenders, both individuals and communities, and also seek remedy or seek justice. So this third element on strengthening solidarity, collaboration, and building alliances will also include how we build relations with other civil society and our advocates, so that we have a stronger voice, or that our voices will be further amplified, and additional support and additional support can be generated. So these are the three main components of the roadmap, and it's currently being consolidated to make it more action oriented and more of a coherent plan that is doable, in the sense that indigenous peoples can really contribute in implementing this, and also that we need to mobilize resources so that we will be able to support this roadmap. So finally, just to mention that this indigenous peoples roadmap is also has also synergies with the roadmap of the working group, particularly in relation to increasing participation, the respect for FPIC, or the free, prior, and informed consent by states and business, and the importance of monitoring business compliance to due diligence. And I think that the cases that has been presented earlier are good documentation to be presented, because these are really the testimonies that we can share. So on the part of IPRI and its partners, we will be finalizing the cases as case studies that will feed further into the different processes on advancing the recognition of our rights. Finally, I just want to briefly acknowledge the comments made by Blandina Pelia from the UN Indonesia Commission at UN. The Indonesian, what's this? Yeah, she's from the Indonesian government here, based in New York, and I just hope that with the presentation and your response, that this will lead to a constructive dialogue on how to best address the issues raised by indigenous peoples, and as you've mentioned, your responsibility to balance and environment protection and development and other related issues. So, but also for the roadmap, I would encourage indigenous organizations and those that are interested to work on this issue to get in touch with us so that we can further enrich the roadmap, because we will be finalizing this in further consultation with you and those that have participated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And yeah, the importance of a targeted and advocacy strategy is very important. The issue of cooperation, solidarity, strengthening alliances with other actors, it's crucial. All the three components that you mentioned, but as it's always be, I mean, there is no time in such an event to touch upon everything, but we hope, and if GIA is very much interested, also continue the discussion and the dialogue on the final development of the roadmap, because it's a very strong tool for indigenous peoples to monitor the implementation of the UN guiding principles for the next 10 years. So thank you very much, Joanne, for sharing that with us. And as I mentioned, we do not have time for the questions and answers section, but I recommend all of you who have any question to put it in the chat, and so it will be responded. I will go to the last speaker of our event today to provide some closing remarks. So the closing remarks will be given by Cassie Box, who is the Director Global Strategy of the Christensen Fund. From 2013 to 2020, he was the Executive Director of Land is Life, and has for many years focused on growing a broad, trusted network of indigenous grassroots partners. So Cassie, it is a pleasure to have you with us today, and the floor is yours to give some concluding remarks about what you have heard or how this can be used. Thank you very much, Cassie. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lola. It's a pleasure to be with this distinguished panel, and I want to send a special thanks to Indigenous Peoples Rights International and the International Working Group on Indigenous Affairs for inviting the Christensen Fund and others to co-host this important discussion today. As a private foundation whose mission is to uphold the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, I'd like to highlight two things that our foundation is actively doing. Number one, we recognize that our endowment may be invested in businesses and industries that may impact the rights of Indigenous peoples. This is why we are actively looking to every investment that we make to make sure it doesn't go against our mission. I'd like to invite other foundations to take this courageous step to do the same. Secondly, we're excited to start investing in Indigenous businesses alongside our grant making. This is something we are working with our board on to see how we can support the economic empowerment of Indigenous peoples by investing in their own enterprises alongside our grant making dollars. Our speakers today highlighted the importance of businesses and the impacts it has on Indigenous peoples' rights. As they all said, there are critical need to align business-oriented solutions to climate change, such as renewables and biofuels. Businesses must fully recognize and respect Indigenous peoples' rights, including explicitly requirements for free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC. The presentations today demonstrate the major role philanthropy has in this discussion. For example, donors must allocate more flexible support to the campaigns and advocacy efforts of Indigenous peoples to protect their rights against these types of businesses and industries. Donors' support to Indigenous governance systems and legitimately elected leadership of communities is essential in demanding full accountability of businesses to transform the realities in Indigenous territories, to uphold their right to self-determination, which will inevitably enable them to continue their roles in protecting the planet. Thank you to all the speakers and to Lola for moderating this important discussion today. The first side of it that I'm aware of that will hopefully be a productive session at the 21st session on the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Thank you all, and Lola, I hand the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Kashi. Oh, wait a minute. I'm doing it with the telephone and the computer because my computer is not reliable. Okay, anyhow. I will just...
Lola, no la escuchamos.
You're muted.
You need to turn off the volume on your phone while you speak, please.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Now you can hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cassie, and sorry and I apologize to all of you for my technical problems with my computer. So dealing with the computer and the phone is not easy at the same time. But anyhow, thank you very much, first of all, to our speakers here today to share with us all the cases, all the issues that they are facing. And of course, I also want to warmly thank all of you who have joined the event, which is organized in the margins of the 21st session of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And many of us will have to go to the meeting. And I encourage also all of our viewers, our participants in this meeting, if you can also at least join some of the sessions of the Permanent Forum. You can join it in the UN Web TV. You can follow all the sessions. So, and of course, thanks a lot for our interpreters who give us the possibility to understand each other, which is very, very important when establishing dialogues, global dialogues, and particularly Indigenous peoples living in different regions of the world. So thank you very much to all of you. And we hope to continue this dialogue it will be further dialogues on this crucial issue for Indigenous peoples, which is the impact of business enterprises in the rights of Indigenous peoples. Thank you. And now for those who can continue joining, I know we are late, but it will be shown a video that it was prepared by UNPFII on the Indigenous peoples and the UN guiding principles. So those who can continue, you are very, very much welcome to watch the video that it's being shown now.
Indigenous Peoples and the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Indigenous peoples' lands, territories and resources are often regarded by the dominant states and businesses as a resource that can simply be taken and exploited.
Traditional Sami lands, they are considered state property.
As Indigenous peoples defend their rights, they are criminalised, marginalised and abused. To address these and other human rights abuses and violations, in June 2011, the United Nations adopted the Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. This is the UNGP. Business can create jobs, growth and infrastructure, but can also engage in corruption, pollution and human rights violations. So it is important to implement the guiding principles to ensure businesses respect human rights. The UNGP is a framework applicable to states and businesses. It clarifies their duties and responsibilities in relation to human rights when doing business. These apply to all states and to all business enterprises, both small and large, local and international. The UNGP consists of 3 pillars: protect, respect, remedy. Protect. The state's duty is to protect against human rights abuses. Respect. Business shall respect and avoid infringing human rights.
Business entities, they should make sure that UNGP should be implemented to make sure that Indigenous people's right is not violated.
Remedy. States and businesses should ensure access to effective remedies for rights violations. Supporting the UNGP. The UNGP is overseen by the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Their mandate is to promote the UNGP, identify good practices, make recommendations for effective remedies, monitor alleged human rights abuses and intervene if necessary, and importantly, guide the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. The UN Forum on Business and Human Rights is an annual 3-day event. It serves as a global platform for stakeholders to discuss trends and challenges and promote dialogue and cooperation on issues linked to business and human rights. The participation of Indigenous peoples within the forum enables them to advocate for the inclusion of the collective rights enshrined in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP.
I can say that the Forum on Business and Human Rights, which is held annually, you can read the subtitles on the screen.
The forum enables them to raise awareness on the human rights abuses and violations committed against, to advance and develop a common position and recommendations, engage directly with members of the working group, network and strengthen solidarity with NGOs and other allies, engage with financial institutions, businesses and states and other relevant actors. It is fundamental that Indigenous peoples engage at the different levels: international, regional and national. Implementing the UNGP, National Action Plans, NAP. These should be developed through a multi-stakeholder platform including Indigenous peoples. An NAP should include commitments by the states on how business will be regulated and how the 3 pillars will be implemented. A decade of UNGP implementation. After 10 years of the UNGP, challenges still remain as the rights of Indigenous peoples continue to be ignored and violated by states and businesses.
For example, on the Norwegian side, there is the Fosen wind power plant, which is, I believe, the biggest wind power park in Europe. And that is built on traditional Sami territories and without consent.
There are some good experience, but there are some not so good experiences on these mines. We want people here have a job, but they don't actually do that. And there's also a lot of environmental issues.
The NAPs in many countries missed the opportunity to address wide-scale violation of human rights, as well as developing policies to implement the standards enshrined in UNDRIP. This includes free, prior and informed consent, FPIC, and the recognition of customary justice systems as part of the remedy pillar.
Nuestros territorios y bosques son vida, no son mercancía.
Our territories and forests are life. They are not merchandise. Indigenous peoples have insisted that our territory is not for sale. Businesses must comply with their due diligence and respect our right to free, prior, and informed consent. Likewise, they must comply with international human rights standards in all their activities, including their supply chain.
However, progress has been made that benefits Indigenous peoples, including voluntary due diligence by businesses, an increase of NAPs with the participation of Indigenous peoples, raised awareness and attention to human rights abuses. There are examples proving that collaboration can work. In Australia, a participation agreement was created between Argyle Diamonds and the Miriwong, Gija, Malning and Woolnar peoples on whose lands an Argyle mine sits. In the Arctic, the Sami people successfully campaigned to have Stora Enso, a multinational paper company, change its wood procurement practices.
Companies often want to maintain some kind of image of being respectful towards human rights, towards indigenous people's rights, environmental standards, and so on. Nowadays, that social media can be used very effectively to mobilize a lot of attention.
Regional and national progress has been seen in Latin American countries with the development of FPIC protocols and judiciary decisions related to human rights abuses by businesses. But it remains a very dangerous environment for human rights defenders. What do Indigenous peoples want over the next 10 years?
What we envision in the next decade of UNGP implementation, a change in the behavior of companies and governments in engaging with Indigenous peoples based on the respect for our rights, our dignity, and our roles as stewards of nature. And we need effective mechanisms for states and companies to be accountable to their human rights obligations. We need states to adopt a legally binding treaty for business to respect human rights as an urgent concern.
There are differences between the hopes related to states, business, and among Indigenous peoples themselves, but there are fundamentals that form the foundation of the cooperation required to achieve a sustainable balance between business, human rights, and Indigenous peoples. So what is it that Indigenous peoples are hoping for? Integration of the UNDRIP in the UNGP implementation, including the proper application of FPIC. Recognise, respect and support community-driven FPIC protocols and guidelines when engaging with Indigenous peoples. Establish effective mechanisms for Indigenous peoples' access to remedy at project, national, regional and global levels, as well as the integration of Indigenous customary justice systems. Conduct outreach for awareness raising on the rights of Indigenous peoples and the UNGP. Establish effective mechanisms for the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples at all levels, especially of women and youth.
Было бы очень важно, чтобы мы, старшее поколение, конечно же, уделяли больше внимания развитию и образованию молодежи, чтобы наша молодежь могла права своих народов на том же уровне, на котором делается и в рамках ООН, и в рамках.
Our greatest hope is for a just, equitable and sustainable world with respect for diversity and the dignity of all its people.
So thank you very much again to all participants, all who have joined us today to this side event. And I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.